welcome everybody to what I regard as a very important event, especially as a lot of people, my brother and scientific friends included, don't seem to know what transhumanism means or what it is. And so there's quite a lot of public education to do. So I'm just going to give a short introduction. Some of you, I think, will have been in Science of Consciousness in Barcelona. I know Harold was there, and the Festival of Consciousness, which followed on from it, which was really quite an event, and sort of wall to wall, if you were up for that. I just want to say something about the Galileo Commission, Galileo Report. The commission was set up around 2018, or just slightly before, and that's the date when Harold published the first Galileo Commission report. And our metaphor, as you will be aware, is that we need to look through the telescope at evidence and issues. Otherwise, we won't have the full picture, and we won't therefore have an accurate view of reality. And so the Galileo telescope is very much the metaphor that we're using. And if you haven't read the original Galileo report, there are a number of different versions of it. There's the full report, there is a summary report, then there's a so-called layman's report, and a summary of the argument in 14 languages. So you can have a look at that if you're unfamiliar. We do have a summary of the argument in this report as well. And so this one is a supplement to the Galileo Commission report, but in fact, it's not really a supplement. It's like a full report on its own, because it's just about the same length, if not slightly longer, than the original Galileo report. And I think that's an indication of its importance. And where I see the connection between the two, and obviously Harold is the author of both of them, is this really the dominance of the mechanistic paradigm, the mechanistic metaphor within science, and to a lesser extent within philosophy and psychology. And what we're talking about here is a further extension of the mechanistic metaphor. And we're finding this with a lot of what's going on with AI as well. And we have a very distinguished panel with us this afternoon. Harald Walach is speaking from Basel. And then we'll have Ian McGilchrist from Skye, and he tells us that he's had to pull a blind, amazingly, because there's so much light coming into his from the sun. And then we have Anne Baring from Hampshire, and then finally we have Greg Braden, who's speaking from his studio in New Mexico. And here is his new book, which I reviewed, and I had a conversation with Greg about this. If you haven't seen the last issue, then it's in there. And those of you who haven't signed up for either the Galileo Commission mailing list or the Scientific and Medical Network mailing list, do think of doing so, because we have a very rich series of events. And I think the fundamental question that we're dealing with here is, what is a human being? And I discussed this in my own introduction. And I think there are two very broad answers to this. One is that we are a spiritual being having a human experience. In other words, there is a transcendent spiritual component to the human being. And the other is that we're biological machines, algorithms, data points, hackable animals. In other words, we need to be upgraded, enhanced, and in a form that enables us to be manipulated and controlled and kept in order by the authorities. And so that's the rather dystopian view, which you'll already find as a technocratic system is prevalent in China. So if you want to know where the elite people, like in the WEF, World Economic Forum, want to take us, it's in that direction. And we think this is, or I think this is fundamentally flawed as a view of the human being. And Harold will say a lot more about this. And so we really have two different corresponding trajectories, evolutionary trajectories. One is towards a spiritual renaissance, a renewal of culture, and the other is towards a sort of technocratic control system and a form of authoritarianism, digital totalitarianism. And this is just marching on at the moment. There is a very strong impulse towards this. It's sponsored by some very powerful people. And I think that one of the things we're dealing with here more generally is a rise of authoritarianism. And authoritarianism also applied to knowledge and information. And this is achieved through what Manuel Castells, in his communication power, called narrative control. That you make sure that everybody, the general public, is reading only one view, and anything else has to be censored and taken care of, in inverted commas. And I just want to reassert that science itself proceeds by questioning, but not by consensus, by imposing a sort of scientific authority, but by questioning. And I also ought to say that the contents of the report are obviously the views of Harald Walach. And if there's something you find very controversial, well, it's his views and doesn't necessarily reflect those of the network. And on that note, I will pass over to Harald, who's going to speak for about 40 minutes. Then we're going to have 10 minutes of comment and input from our panelists, and then we'll open up for questions. So I hope we'll have plenty of time for that.
Thank you very much, David, for the introduction, and good afternoon to all who are present here. I'm going to give a presentation which I'm just currently I'm going into it. As David said, I have written the first Galileo report, which is dealing with scientism, and I have been tasked to do another report on transhumanism, which will be available in a written form, first in English, and later on, I guess we will also publish a German one. I'm not going to go through the report point by point, but I'm picking out a few very important issues. So let me start off with showing you that report, where I will be mainly focusing on medical transhumanism. There are many aspects of transhumanism, but my main competence lies in medicine and medical interventions, and so I'm focusing on that. But I'm also presenting data on the diffusion of transhumanist ideas in society, because I've done a representative survey in German and in Germany with a nine-item scale, which I have developed. And that is the first point I'm going to start off with. Now, transhumanism is the idea that we humans, as the pinnacle of evolution, can now steer the direction of the evolution directly. And as David said, it comes from the idea that we are just algorithms. And because nature has blundered, as many transhumanists believe, we have to correct her where she got it wrong, using gene therapeutic methods, using technical gadgets like brain-computer interfaces or other implants, which is clearly steering towards an internet of body and things. I'm not going into that in that presentation, but I've written about it, and with a final goal of defying death. Outcome should be a superhuman or transhuman cyborg, a cybernetic organism which combines human and technical aspects. I start with my data. How widespread are these beliefs? Is transhumanism irrelevant maybe and just the idea of a few crazy guys? Well, we'll see. So this is the transhumanism scale, which I'm going to present first to you. It is measuring transhumanist beliefs. I've derived the items from the literature, and I've given it to 1,051 people from a German online panel, which is approaching representativity, as you can see here in those data. The scale is reasonably reliable, I think, and we have just submitted it for publication. And these are the items. So 9 items. It's just right that the limitations of the human body are expanded by technical inventions, such as interfaces to computers. It is just right that the limitations of the human body are expanded by genetic technology. I'm convinced that in the near future, medical science, together with digitization, will move death into the far distance. If there were a direct brain-computer interface of our brain, I would have inserted it in order to have direct access to the internet. The, the mRNA COVID vaccinations have demonstrated that it is possible to insert foreign genes into the body to the benefit of humanities. We will merge in the near future with computers and artificial intelligence into a cyborg and superhuman. Digitization will help us to transcend our boundaries. God is dead, we are God ourselves. The progress of science will bring us mainly blessings. Now, reading through those items, you may yourself give an estimate how many people would assent to those. I'll show you the data. I show you the items one by one, and I have highlighted the assent category +1, and the other ones you can see. So -1 means I do not agree, 0 means I don't know, and 1 means I agree. So the first item, limitations of the human body expanded through technical inventions, 41% agree. Expanded by genetic technology, 33% agree. Digitization and medical progress will move death into the far distance, 32% agree. Brain-computer interfaces, if there were a brain-computer interface, 24% would have it inserted. So nearly a quarter of the population finds that a very good idea. The mRNA COVID vaccines have been showed that gene technology can be used positively, 37%. We will unite ourselves to become cyborgs, 22% say yes. Digitization will help us to transcend our boundaries. That is clear for 47%. God is dead, we are God ourselves is now answered positively by 20%. So, and this is the final one. The progress of science will be mainly beneficial, 35%. So what you see here is that about 20 to 47% of the population is actually answering this scale or the different items positively. And this, I remind you, is a quasi-representative German sample. It's not really representative because for that you would need an interview sample, and that's very expensive and beyond my budget, but it is approaching representativity. So we can see that the transhumanist mindset has actually penetrated widely into the popular culture. And therefore, I think a critical discourse is in place. So I'm going to show in that report what transhumanism is, and I will also hint to where it might lead us to. And we all should engage in a critical discourse. Do we really want this? So here comes a short primer for those who don't know what transhumanism is. Here I have listed many sources of transhumanism, and they may not be all, but one important source is up here, the evolutionary theory. Genetics and eugenics, the idea that humans have to be genetically improved. Then the philosophical background is given by Nietzsche and his idea of Übermensch. Many transhumanists refer to him, although philosophical critics like Michael Hauskeller actually show that transhumanists haven't even understood Nietzsche. There is another important source, medicine, anti-aging, and genetic engineering. And there is also some semi-benign bridge there, which is biohacking, improving humans by introducing supplements and stuff like that. For instance, Ray Kurzweil, one of the important inspirations of transhumanism, confesses himself to taking about 60 or so pills each day to improve his medical well-being. Now, the red ones, computer science, miniaturization, robotics, cybernetics, cybernetic organisms, cyborgs, is another important source, together with nanotechnology and scientific progress in general. Actually, the psychological idea comes from Maslow. I'm not going into that, but I'm mentioning it in my report. The idea of improving, developing the fully functioning person. And transhumanism is going beyond that. Now, the precondition of all that, I think, is Lyotard who announced the postmodern condition in 1979, saying that we are at the end of the big salvation narratives of Christianity and the Abrahamic religions. And that has opened up the relativism of postmodernism, because if there is no truth, and if there is no serious and strong foundation, there is also a vacuum of belief systems. And in that vacuum, new ideas, new religions will be streaming in. And transhumanism is just one such a new religion. Now, the important point is we all have a need for a religion or Weltanschauung. We cannot not have a religion. It's impossible to not have a religion or a Weltanschauung. This man here is Robin Collingwood, who wrote a very important book, 1940. He's an Oxford philosopher, and the book is called Essay on Metaphysics. And there he really convincingly showed that we always have to make presuppositions, which he calls absolute presuppositions. I've dealt with that in my first Galileo report. That's why I'm not saying much here, but maybe so much. These absolute presuppositions, they come from the cultural background. They are rarely conscious, and they are very seldomly discussed. So they infuse our culture and our thinking and give us the background Weltanschauung of what we are doing. And transhumanism is just such a thing, but it's more than a Weltanschauung. It's a kind of religion, which I'm going to show you in a few more minutes. It is a religion, as transhumanists themselves say. This is a quote from Aubrey de Grey, who you can see here on the right side. He's one of transhumanism's frontman for abolishing aging, and he writes, "Science is the industrialized world's new religion." And I think he speaks for most of the people in that movement. This is clearly a scientific belief system, the belief in the pervasive explanatory power of the natural sciences. And that means whatever is important can be addressed by means of natural science, and whatever cannot be so addressed is not important. And whatever problem we cannot solve yet will be solvable by the future progress of science in the future. Now, the point is, this is religious hope, straight and clear. Only it's not hope that comes through belief in any God or transcendent entity. It's hope in the progress of science. I've written out here for you the old medieval definition of hope. Est enim spes certa expectatio future beatitudinis. I made a misprint here. This is just expectatio. Means hope is a certain expectation of future glory. That's what you see all the time in transhumanist discourse. Expectation of future glory. We can't do it now, but we will be able to do it in the future. Here come two slides where I juxtapose transhumanism and religion in the form of Christianity, because it's the religion I know best. So we both have, in both areas, we have the idea that humans are in need of improvement. In the case of Christianity, it's salvation and deliverance, because man is not perfect. And this salvation comes from faith, faith in Christ, faith in God. And in the transhumanist situation, salvation comes from the belief in the power of science. Christianity finds that this salvation has its expression by a spiritual perfection through prayer, contemplation, ethical ways of living and action, while for transhumanists, the methods of science like gene editing, gene therapy, nanotechnology, and so forth will achieve that. Now, in transhumanism, we are God now, as you saw in my survey, 20% believe that. And in religion, God is the Lord of history. That comes from Jewish religion. In Christianity, deliverance comes from leading one's life along those ethical codes, improving through the help of divine grace. Transhumanists don't need that because they have medical technical inventions that will solve the problems. In both cases, there is fulfillment in the future. But in Christianity, it is within the transcendent realm. And in transhumanism, it is the future on earth. And you can follow that up And there you can see that in Christianity, there is a transcendent essence in humans, as David said at the beginning, a soul, a spiritual essence, while in transhumanism, mind and consciousness are just biological algorithmic processes that can be and should be modeled and replaced by computer technology, because that is much more powerful in a few years than our brain. That's what transhumanists believe. Now, in Christianity, we have an idealistic or dualistic ontology, meaning mind, consciousness has its separate role. Whereas in transhumanism, mind is just derived from material interaction of neurons. In Christianity, death is the final fulfillment, while in transhumanism, it is the ultimate tragedy. So man should improve himself in both lines, but in one way through ethical guidelines internally, and in transhumanism by technology externally. Now, an important point is values and ethics. In transhumanism, people believe that these values and morals, they are either genetically fixed, they come from our evolution, such as altruism or so, or they are derived from social conventions, and therefore they can be changed to our liking. In any religion, values are always anchored in a transcendental realm. It's a little bit like the internal fabric of the world. Mathematics is the internal fabric of matter. Therefore, physics is so powerful. We have nothing in comparison within the inner realm of experience, but my guess, my hunch is that ethics or values are actually in a similar way the fabric of the world, but from within, one might say. The big question is now, how trustworthy is such a religion? What would be our reason for embracing it, and should it receive public support in form of funding? Let me be clear, everybody should be free to embrace his or her own religion. It can even be the religion of the spaghetti monster. That's a private issue. But as soon as people say, well, this is scientifically proven and public must fund it, and we need funding from public money, things are changing. And as soon as a religion starts to proselytize and go out and say everybody must believe that, it is changing. And this is exactly the point where we are. And that is why we need the discussion. So we should ask ourselves, is science actually a good foundation for a religion? I don't think it is, because science is iconoclastic, means it always destroys pictures that have been handed over to us from the past, even of its own certainties. The man here you can see is Thomas Kuhn, who is very famous for having developed the idea of paradigms, actually coming from Collingwood. And there he showed that science moves in disparate chunks, as it were. New paradigms replace old ones, and scientific progress happens when old certainties and beliefs are wiped out or modified by novel findings. They are sometimes in support of what we already know, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're really destructive. I show you two examples. There is one idea that has been consensus for many years in the beginning of the 19th century, and that's the myth of the scientific basis for the idea of the superiority of the white race, and eugenics, meaning the idea of improving the genetic performance of humans through selection. That came from America and was mainstream scientific consensus. Everybody said that is science. Science shows us that, blah, blah, blah. And it was a basis for all kinds of eugenic proposals already in America. And Hitler actually approved the American eugenic movement and made it the basis for his own proposals and atrocities. And today, we don't call it scientific consensus, we call it racism. There's another example. For many years, people thought cholesterol is very bad for you. it makes you sick, it gives you heart myocardial infarction and heart disease. That was actually seeded, that campaign was actually seeded by the sugar industry, as a couple of historians have shown a couple of years ago. And this is a very interesting read for you if you don't believe me. And in 2020 came out the definitive meta-analysis by a French team, Touan Chartier, who showed with 5 million of human observation years that egg consumption does actually not confer any risk of cardiovascular disease on people. You see here all the studies. This is the meta-analysis output. And at the end, at the very bottom, you see the common estimator is a risk ratio or relative risk of 0.98. So there is no point whatsoever that eggs or cholesterol, in that case, coming from eggs is bad for you. We believe that for more than 20 years. The first time cover comes from 1986, I believe, and the second one comes from 1999. The lesson is science can be very disruptive of previous certainties, and it is not a basis for security. It's not a tower that is built into the steady heights of salvation, but more like a patchwork of insight. And only of those insights where we are putting our torchlight on, our searchlight. And we may not be seeing everything. We are just seeing this, we are seeing that. And it is being continuously updated, corrected, sometimes supporting previous ideas, sometimes contradicting them. And therefore, science cannot, by default and definition, serve as a certain basis for current or future faith. It can serve for some very useful purposes, but it's not good as a religion. So a scientific religion is actually self-contradictory, or only held by people who do not understand the nature of science. So my claim would be all these people who say science can be a religion, blah, 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 they have not understood what science actually is. So I will go into some examples of medical transhumanism, and I'm leaving out quite a few other ones, which are dealt with in the report itself. Now, this is Aubrey de Grey. I've already mentioned him, who is a computer scientist turned anti-aging researcher. The human enhancement movement believes in the improvement of the human being through gene technology, AI, computer technology, pharmacology, and the goal certainly is immortality and abolishing death. That is what Aubrey de Grey has been going on about with what he calls strategies for engineering negligible senescence. So to make humans live longer and longer and longer until death can be postponed through regrowing of organs, understanding aging, and changing it. What I've observed is that there is a very general bias in transhumanist discourse, namely believing in the benefits of medical or scientific achievements and neglecting potential dangers or side effects. And I'm showing you a few examples now. The most prominent example is Prozac antidepressants. Antidepressants have been developed in the antidepressants or the group where Prozac belongs to are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. They were developed on the idea that depression is just a brain problem where serotonin is missing. So we fill in serotonin by stopping reuptake of serotonin into the neurons, and off goes depression. This theory is flawed. We know that, and we have known that for a long time, and it has just been debunked by Joanna Moncrief and her group 2 years ago in a very, very extensive umbrella review where she looked at all the basic paradigms that try to show that serotonin is the basis of depression. It is not, right? But by a huge myth-making advertising like this one in America mainly, but also in other countries, there has been installed a myth. So people believe that, and that myth is very powerful. So if you give antidepressants to people who are depressed, they improve based on that myth. So they have very high effect sizes, pre to post, but it's based on a very large placebo effect. If you compare against placebo, the effect sizes are extremely small, just a third of a standard deviation, far away from the half standard deviation that NICE, the British regulator, actually demands for antidepressants. And they have very severe side effects, among which are actually suicide, which it's supposed to prevent. And it has been long known by the industry that antidepressants for youth and children increase suicide risk, and it was hidden from the public for about 20 years. Now we know it, and it's on the inserts of the medications, but it is not very known in public perception. You lose sexual interest, you get obese, and most of all, you get addicted. This has also been challenged by the industry, but there is certain proof now, and I've referenced that in my report. So here is a little question for you. The three most important reasons for premature mortality in the West are myocardial infarction, cancer, and what is the third? Little quiz. It is medical interventions, mostly death. That comes from Peter Götzsch's book, Deadly Medicine. And I've shown you here a little cartoon by the German cartoonist Gluck. The second example is the COVID-19 vaccination campaign. I would call it a transhumanist field experiment in trying out gene therapeutic prevention on a very large scale, among others. There's certainly other aspects as well, but I want to highlight this one here. Because these modified RNA and vector RNA vaccinations, they operate with gene technology that force human cells to express foreign genes, spike protein of the virus. And this is how it works. It goes into the cell, it goes into the ribosome, and the ribosome is forced to express the amino acids that in the end form the spike protein, which is expressed. Sounds like a clever idea, but it's actually gene therapy. And had you asked 5 years ago, people in the public, would you like gene therapy? They would have cried out, because in Germany they were lining up in front of shops and saying, we don't want any gene technology in our tomatoes and in our corn. Now they have it in themselves. I call it a transhumanist field experiment because gene therapy is actually the precondition for the transhumanist agenda. And here it was tried out. Whether it was tried out by intention or just by way of the paradigm, the ideology spreading around is irrelevant. I think this is what happened. The benefits are largely overstated. I'm just quoting here one example, a study by the group of Peter Doshi, who has looked at the Canadian regulatory data and found that the likelihood to have a serious adverse event from the vaccination is higher than the risk of being hospitalized with severe COVID-19. We looked at the mathematical models of Watson and his group that claimed that there have been millions of lives saved, and these models are simply flawed. We published that, but we were not able to publish it in any of those good journals, but a year later only. But nevertheless, these models, they are simply flawed. Just a while ago, a very large bibliography has been published on Zenodo, the preprint server of the CERN in Geneva. It lists all the papers, and I've just listed them here, that report vaccination side effects. They're quite a lot, as you can see here. And these are all peer-reviewed studies. What I find interesting is this here. 80 studies document the toxicity of the nanoparticles that are the container of the spike vaccines, because they are highly inflammatory. They were not allowed for human use, and they are now being used for that. 140 studies show that the imprinting of that original Wuhan strain leads to an immunological shift that actually creates more problems than it solves. And it also, some studies also show that there was mutation pressure on the virus that has been introduced by the vaccination campaign, and quite a few other ones. So let's focus on gene therapy. This is, in the view of transhumanists, a necessary requirement for upgrading human status, how it's sometimes called, genetically, either by somatic gene therapy, meaning flooding all the cells of the body with the new genes, or stem cells, which is a little bit more elegant, or the germline editing after in vitro fertilization. So a true transhumanist actually would have children only by artificial means, because only then can you actually edit the germline so that all other cells will have the same genetic imprint. And the ideas of genetic upgrading in transhumanistic authors is actually very, very simplistic. I'm not a specialist in genetics. I'm a generalist, understanding a little bit about biology. But even me, with my very, very limited understanding, can see that the knowledge that these authors actually show is predicated on a pre-1990s textbook knowledge, where only those genes matter and only these building blocks. So if you can read the book of life, the story goes, you can also change it. Now, it's not quite as easy as that, because the reality is much more complex. Only 1 to 2% of the DNA code, depending on which author you are reading, codes actually for proteins. The rest, we do not really know what it's doing. And then there is the big question of the epigenome, which is everything that is kind of in enveloping or growing around the genome, which is unraveled in its complexity only now. So changing genes will never be sufficient. Then, in addition, every cell, not only our human body, every cell has an immune system of its own, and it will try to expel or silence foreign genes. That is why, for instance, genetically modified tomatoes have to be modified every now and then, because you can't regrow them into being the same thing, because the genes are simply switched off. This is an old picture, as you can see, 2010, of the epigenome. And it gives you a little bit of an idea what is happening there. This is the chromosome, where we have inside nucleosomes, which are kind of put together like this. And if you unravel it, you can see that these nucleosomes, where the DNA is threaded through, as it were, has kind of little antennas or something like protein filaments that can be where you can attach methyl groups or acetyl groups, and depending on what is being attached, methylation will switch the gene off, acetylation will switch it on. And it's not only a switch on and switch off process, it's also a gradual process. And then you have those microRNAs that are only gradually being understood, and they seem to be also controlling expression of genes. And then you can actually imagine that these genes are more adjacent or closer together, and so they talk to each other and control each other. All this is nicely summed up in these books here, which I've consulted, and I'm sure I've missed a lot of the other ideas of epigenetics, but only this little bit shows you that changing genes will never ever be what it is thought to be, to make better humans or better expression of genes. This epigenome controls and modifies gene expression temporarily. If we eat some food for a while, maybe a couple of months, if we go vegetarian for half a year, or if we go vegan for a year, it may change expression of genes for a lifetime or even for several generations. People don't even know. And depending on interactions with the environment, like behavior, nutrition, toxicological factors in the environment, genes will be switched on, switched off, will become active or will be repressed. And this is a highly dynamic interplay, which is only gradually being understood in its general architecture. So it expresses and self-regulates our organism, and our organism is a self-regulated system that you cannot just simply meddle with, like with a car's engine, where you replace a carburetor or you replace another entity, because every replacement, every change will have a very complex reaction that you cannot predict. So we are not machines, but we are highly active, self-controlled and self-regulated systems. And such systems, they always respond to every intervention with a highly complex, self-initiated regulatory activity, meaning as soon as you try to change something, the system will change it back or will react in a complex way. Finally, I would like to spend a few words on a project of abolishing death. That has been analyzed by Harari in his book Homo Deus, and I think correctly. And here is an example. So this is cryonics by Alcor, which is a foundation operative since 53 years. They say you can preserve life by cryopreservation, so the body is being frozen or the liquids are being exchanged, and that will pause the dying process. And if you die of a disease today that may be curable in 50 years, then you might be put back to life again and your disease can be cured. Mind you, nobody ever has been revived out of that cryogenic state, but people hope that will happen, which is the religious category of hope. This is something I looked at a couple of years ago. Today, there are probably 200 people more, 1,418 members. And here you see the board of Alcor. Martin Rothblatt, for instance, is a transsexual activist of the transsexual movement. I'm not going into that in my presentation, but I've written about it in the report. And she's also a potent funder of the whole transhumanist and the transsexual movement. So they say it's surprisingly cheap. Imagine you subscribe today at age 60, you'd be paying $1,200 per year, and at age 80, you'd have paid about $24,000 a year. Quite cheap for being able to maybe gain eternal life at some point. But the question is, how reasonable is that project? The question is not, is it possible? But perhaps it's even possible in the future, who knows? But is it reasonable? Is it honest and consistent? And can one rationally argue for it? And I would say no. Disney was actually one who has himself cryopreserved, I believe. Reason number one is the concept is really neo-colonialist and not sustainable. It's very expensive. I've did a little calculation for you. So if you be preserving 1 billion of people, you'd have to spend more than the military budget of the US and Russia per year. And this is a typically colonialist project because only rich people can actually afford that. And it will, by necessity, mean that everybody else will either have to be stopped procreating or there would have to be a depopulation program. It emphasizes the present at the expense of future generations. Now, if you imagine that there is a population growth and the current generation becomes immortal, and new generations also want to participate, you'd have a very, very steep population growth curve. So you can only stop that by prohibiting procreation or you depopulate. The concept is also self-contradictory, because if old generations live at the expense of younger generations, they prevent innovation, because innovation normally comes from the younger. I also have some clever ideas sometimes, being 68, but the ideas I'm presenting are actually ideas which I had many years ago. Innovation is dependent on old ideas perishing and new ideas arising. Americans say sometimes science progresses funeral by funeral, kind of using Planck's dictum. Nick Maxwell, the British philosopher who died a couple of months ago, said in one of the last video calls I was part of, he said, "It's good that I die." 85% of my ideas are nonsense, and it's good that these die so that new ideas can come up. Death and finality allow for values. That is very paradoxical, but it's true. If we do not die, we do not have to decide. And if we don't decide, nothing will be valuable to us. Because we are forced to decide partners, places to live, friends to spend time with, things we are doing, they have become valuable to us. So death is not the final ill to be defeated, it's the final helper, actually. This picture of Erasmus of Rotterdam, which hangs here in our Basel picture collection, was painted by Hans Holbein. And it is precisely valuable because there are only 2 copies. And this picture is actually about this size, which you can see, and it was painted extremely meticulously with a fine Martin brush. And that is what makes this picture so incredibly valuable, because it's finite, because there is only 2 copies of that. There's only one thing in biology that is eternal, and that is cancer cells. Philosophical criticism is gradually picking up. Here you see 3 of them. Roland Benedict, my colleague, who started many years ago criticizing transhumanism, but mostly in German. Susan Levine, who has just written a very interesting book, and Michael Hauskeller, who teaches in Liverpool, I believe, a very interesting book where he actually shows that transhumanism is a postmodern mythology. In our tradition, we have the counterposition that David mentioned. There is a human core. You can call it consciousness, you can call it soul, you can call it a spark of the soul, or mind, or Geist in German, that guarantees human dignity and which is beyond material control. It's an expression of our spiritual nature, and some say body is the temple of God. So the basic construction of the human body is actually good and should not be meddled with. Some people have tried to define it like Fukuyama on the basis of our genetic makeup. I'm not sure that works if we go back down the road of materialism to define the specificity of human values. So I think we need actually a spiritual idea if we want to uphold human dignity. So I'm at the end of my presentation here, so we can discuss a little bit. I showed you that transhumanism is a scientific worldview that is actually already quite common in the population. It would be interesting to see how it is in Britain, how it is in certain segments of the society, like with scientists, with religious people, etc. But I don't have the data. It is a materialistic technocratic movement with religious emphasis. If you read those texts, you are reminded of proselytizing religious teachers. It is an implicit ideology that operates very surreptitiously. So it's not outspoken, and therefore it's never discussed. But many people who are in powerful positions, I would think, or economically powerful, they hold such beliefs. And hardly anybody seems to be aware, and therefore we should encourage discourse. We should discuss whether we want that. And if we don't want that, we should do something about it. I have founded a little publishing cooperative, where the German language version of my report will be published, and you can write me an email if you want to have the presentation or any of those papers I mentioned in my report. And that would be the end of my talk, David. I'm grateful for your attention, and now we can go into discussion.
Harold, thank you very much indeed. That's a very concise overview of the report. And I was going to mention that you will have been able to download, those of you who are listening, you'll be able to download the report from the last mailing that went out this morning, and then it'll be up on the Galileo Commission site. And then we're making arrangements for it to be made available in hard copy through Lulu, but that would take a month or so to get that cranked up. But we'll let you know when it's available in hard copy, because I know a lot of you, including me, much prefer to read paper rather than screens. So I'm going to hand over to Ian now. and for some observations, then Anne, and then Greg, and then we'll open up.
Yes, well, thank you, David, and thank you very much, Harold. I think you know that I have high regard for the work you've put into this, and I'm very grateful for it. I'm just going to make a few rather general, more philosophical points, because I have a perhaps a slightly more impassioned view. You may do a very good job of holding back your passion, and probably I should too. But I do think that it is
On
probably one of the
purpose.
most it's one of the most important issues, if not the most important issue that we now face. Why would anyone want to be a machine? Surely what we want to do is to be more fully human. Are we really fulfilling human potential? I feel that when I look back over the ages, I see us fulfilling less of our potential than our ancestors. We can't just become something else. A hippo can't become a butterfly. What does it mean to be a human? And that's what we need to be asking ourselves. What is it that we are doing here? What are we? What is this world that we find ourselves in? And there are a number of points here that are very hard to measure and therefore get left out of all the left hemispheric calculations, but are of almost unlimited significance. One is the meaning of life, and we know that the sense of a meaning in life is profoundly important for the value, the sense of fulfillment that a human being has. I have my own views about why we can't find that anymore, and partly it's because science has told us that it hasn't found any purpose or meaning or values in the universe, but that's all very well, but it starts out from the perfectly unimpeachable premises that it's not going to look for anything like that. It's going to leave those out of the account, and that's fine for certain purposes, but what it's not entitled to do at the end of the day is say we didn't find any. Unfortunately, the humanities have jumped on the bandwagon, and in the last 50 years have relentlessly attacked the idea of truth. And that, I think, leaves us absolutely without any bearings. And I understand why young people today should feel they're confused, they don't know what to think or what to do, or why they should carry on with living at all. There's a very high suicide rate amongst young people now, much higher than before. And you didn't mention that, Harold, in your presentation, but it is a very striking cause of death in the young that wasn't as pronounced in the past. And fulfillment is something we partly feel through adversity. Adversity is not purely negative. Indeed, negation, if I can put it that way, is not purely negative in the modern sense. In fact, by denying, by resisting, by negating, by defining, we actually cause things to come into being. This is something that's very well known in the East, but not so well known in our very single-minded, very simplistically organized, mechanistically orientated worldview. The nature of suffering and death are intrinsic to the meaning of life. Interestingly, I often talk about the things that we know we have great evidence for that make life seem or give it or fulfill it in its meaningfulness. And Viktor Frankl, who after all, through the experience of himself and seeing his family destroyed in the concentration camps, had a good deal to digest on this topic, thought that one of the three most important things that gave meaning to life was suffering. And I often say, a computer, an AI system cannot suffer, and it cannot know that it's going to die. And I welcomed very much, Harold, your comments on how the knowledge that we're going to die make our choices urgent and give meaning to how we dispose our time. If we thought that there wasn't many another reason for doing so. When I mention science and its baleful effect, I'm not saying that science itself is at fault, of course. I very much admire the achievements of science, and I've been, I hope, able to contribute to that myself. But it's not science that's at fault, it's scientism, a very foolish belief, which is not borne out by any evidence that science should have no limits and can answer all our questions. Indeed, one of the ways of thinking of science is that approach to life which is never fully right and is perpetually mistaken. That sounds rather negative, but the fact is that science should always be correcting itself, and the history of science is one of progress, in which things it used to believe it no longer does believe. Science is a servant, it's not our master, and it can't dictate the values whereby we lead our lives. Of course, alleviation of suffering is always brought forward as a reason for ever greater involvement of technology in human well-being, and I'm a doctor. I believe in alleviation, but there is an enormous difference between even the most mechanical interventions in the human body, such as a new heart valve, and the idea of putting in some chip that will alter the our conscious mentation, or the sort of elements that you were talking about, Harold, that will alter gene expression. I mean, this is a step change of gigantic proportions with unseen consequences. Anyone who is honest doesn't know where this might lead. And so it's not a matter of science, it's a matter of foolish ignorance and blind optimism, which are not signs of high intelligence or insight, and an overwhelming desire to vindicate our belief that we should be immortal and are divine through technology. Technology is quite separate from science. The changes that it will bring about are also irreversible changes. And once, as it were, we are perhaps all infected with nanoparticles, which change the way we operate, this cannot be simply reversed. And if somebody has a chip implanted in them, we don't know what it would do to them to take that chip out again, particularly in a world in which everything depended on having that ability to interface using some strange alien part of one's body that would be part of a totalitarian system. It's just one of the many things that could be done to cruelly destroy somebody in a society where everything, unfortunately, and to the destruction of the great values of truth and beauty and goodness and love, depended on a vast mechanical interface. And even if its power for good were enormous, and I take a lot of convincing that this were likely, taking everything into account, its power for harm is unlimited and of the most terrible kind. The most unimaginably horrible things are immediately made possible once you have totalitarian control, compared with which what the Nazis were able to bring to bear it seems like something very primitive. Destroying is always easier than creating something good, and its capacity to be used to destroy will be inevitably exploited. Indeed, I think that this whole movement is profoundly evil. I think it's based on a rejection of nature, a rejection of truth, a rejection of beauty, a rejection of human dignity. And I think that under no circumstances should we be publicly funding this research. In fact, we should be doing everything in our power to inhibit it. Another thing about it is that it wants to make us capable of doing more things, but surely the problem is that we're doing all kinds of things that we shouldn't be doing, and we now have power to do more of them. We have more power, but not wisdom. And having extreme power without wisdom is a recipe for every kind of evil and every kind of suffering. Wisdom would inevitably involve stopping doing many of the things we already can and do, as again Eastern philosophers would not be surprised to hear. Destroying the network of human social and emotional connections, which the advances of this thinking would inevitably do and are indeed already doing, have the most devastating effects on who we are, because we are spiritual beings, we are social beings, we are emotionally alive, we are not just computing. And it would remove, apart from anything else, the urge to do anything. Why would we do it if it could be carried out by a machine, or a machine in us would carry it out? The urge to excel, the urge to help others would be expunged, because it wouldn't really be us doing any of it. It would simply be a mechanism that was greater than us, outside of us, and was working through us. This alienates us from nature and increases the hubris whereby we're tempted to think of ourselves as God. It also assumes, by the way, an already obscenely heavy use of resources just to create current AI that can only increase. It assumes it will always work, which is a phenomenally stupid assumption. I mean, how could one ever assume that? At the moment, the technology we have 95% of the time doesn't actually work. One finds one's time taken up by trying to get around the difficulties created by situations that used to be managed by humans, now being managed by machines. It doesn't save time, and it's very often deeply wrong. And that's affecting the way in which we live on a daily level. There may be very sophisticated technologies that can work relatively reliably, and maybe that promissory thing that in the future they'll be more reliable, but the more advanced they get, the more mistakes they're capable of making, and the more profound those mistakes will be. So in conclusion, I thought of a myth I hadn't thought of, which is that of a mechanism that longs to be a person, Pinocchio. And I thought of my seeing the Disney film of Pinocchio, which I think is very good, as a child. And I remember his visit to Toyland, in which he was seduced to go to this place where nobody worked anymore and everybody was just playing with toys. Now, I won't weigh heavily on it. I will leave it as a self-explanatory image of where we are now. We're seduced by the little glittering toys, by the image that we will need to do nothing, we will live forever. What a miserable, pathetic way of thinking of what a human being is. And it did warn us. It did, after all. Its first great creation was a web.
Ian, phenomenal and impassioned. I love it. Thank you so much. Just a quote from Albert Schweitzer, which I love, is our task is to become more finely and deeply human.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What you've been saying.
And Wittgenstein has remarked that I don't know why we're here, but I'm pretty certain it isn't just to enjoy ourselves.
Well, Goethe
Anyway.
said he only had 4 weeks of pure happiness in his whole life.
In his life, yes, or even
Yes.
3, I think. Yes, yes.
Okay. Well, let's go on to Anne, and then we'll move on to Greg. So, Anne, you need to unmute.
Yeah. I was saying that, first of all, I'd like to thank Harold very much for making transhumanism so clear, because I hadn't really fully understood it before, although I put a chapter on it in my book. So thank you, Harold. And thank you also, Ian, for your wonderful diatribe, really, I think I would call it, and for saying that transhumanism is evil, because I absolutely agree with you. It goes against everything that great civilizations have taught and that have been understood by the greatest philosophers, the greatest thinkers, the greatest artists and creators. It simply is just terrible. And I was thinking I'd written something out, but then afterwards I thought, well, where is this thing arisen from? Why is the psyche giving rise to it, speaking as a Jungian? And I think it's come out of human despair, out of the disillusionment with religious teachings that have not given humanity the answers to 4 great questions. Those questions are, who are we? Where do we come from? What is our purpose on this planet? And where do we go when we die? Now, the Gnostics knew the answers to those 4 questions, but the modern world does not know the answers, and transhumanism certainly doesn't know them. And I don't think the religions really have gone into what it is that humans want to know, which would give life more meaning and deeper meaning to everything, really. And if life has no meaning, the compensation to that is a desire for power. And this is what I think transhumanism has fallen into, because it's a huge ego inflation in Jungian language. It's an inflation of the ego compensating for this sense of despair and disillusionment, which has been going on for about 200 years, I should think, or even 300, since the scientific revolution of the 17th century. So we have to ask the psychic, if transhumanism was my patient, I would say, what is it that's giving you this deep sense of the need for power over everything? And then I would listen to whatever the patient said. So there is an Orphic saying, I can't help putting this in, from 2,500 years ago, which goes, I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my race is of heaven alone. Now, the Orphics knew that 2,500 years ago. Why don't we know? Why have we forgotten that we belong to 2 dimensions, the earthly one and the transcendent one, if you like? But the transcendent one isn't necessarily far away. It is integrated into the dimension that we're living in. But that's another question altogether. And the Essenes, there's a chapter in my book on them. The Essenes knew that we are children of the light. They called themselves children of the light of the divine ground. And they knew that Jesus was a great teacher, not a son of God, but a great teacher, showing them the way back to the light. And we're lacking teachers now, although we've had plenty in the past, and we've got Ian today, thank goodness. And Ian, take a bow there, because you're very important, what you're saying. So we have no knowledge. We haven't got the Essene knowledge. We haven't got the Orphic knowledge. And there's so much knowledge in the past that if the transhumanists were really well educated, they would know more about it. But they're not well educated because they focus only on this one thing, which would give them control and power, first of all, over nature, which they want to improve, and secondly, over the human body, which they again want to improve. And that again is inflated, hugely inflated, because the immune system is the most miraculous thing we have. And our DNA, again, is the most miraculous thing we've had for 200,000 years, as Greg has shown so beautifully in his book, Pure Human. We are tampering with something that is sacred, and we've lost all sense of the sacred. And that is because I think we've got disillusioned with religion going through this phase. We're living now through the time of the death of God, which is marked by social unrest, confusion, conflict, and fear. And this is how a Jungian analyst defined this interlude. The breakdown of a central myth is like the shattering of a vessel containing a precious essence. Meaning is lost, and in its place, primitive and atavistic contents are reactivated. Differentiated values disappear and are replaced by the elemental motivations of power and pleasure, or else the individual is exposed to emptiness and despair. So the outworn image of the sacred has been dying, so that a new image of the sacred and a new story can emerge into human consciousness. And this is something that the transhumanists are completely ignorant of. And this is taking place as we move into a new astrological age. Alchemy gives us a wonderful image of killing the old king, and the old king personifies an outworn image of spirit and an outworn paradigm of reality, one that is cut off from metaphysical reality, cut off from relationship with the invisible, transcendent world. And that's what the position that we're in now. The above has been disconnected from the below, and we're living in the below without any awareness that there is an above. It's ridiculous, really, when you come to think of it. Both my recent books have addressed the reasons why we have become so indoctrinated by scientific materialism that we now see ourselves as masters of the planet, no longer serving any authority beyond our power to control nature and our bodies, both of which are treated as mechanisms that can be manipulated and altered according to our will. This is hubris that is off the scale. I say that again, it's hubris that's off the scale, and we need to be aware of that. A little over 2,500 years, and referring now to the book I just published, in Hebrew culture, nature became separated from spirit because the goddess, who represented divine wisdom and the Holy Spirit, as well as nature, was deleted from the Godhead. And from this point on, nature began to lose her sacredness. There were no longer temples to the goddess, no longer priestesses serving a goddess. Woman's voice was silenced, and the older religions were replaced by the three patriarchal religions with their emphasis on war and conquest. Christianity inherited its image of God from Hebrew culture, together with its creation myth. During the Christian era, nature, matter, and the body were split off from spirit. The body was not regarded as the sacred temple of the soul. With St. Augustine, the sexual act became the transmitter of original sin, a happy idea of his that was not really challenged because it became part of church law. Christianity projected divinity onto one man, naming him as the only Son of God, whose sacrificial death offered us salvation. It did not really recognize and did not dwell on the fact that we carry a spark of divinity that dwells within each of us. With the fading of Christianity, this long historical process has led ultimately to the beliefs of scientific materialism. And this maintains that we're the chance product of a lifeless, mechanistic universe that is without consciousness, intelligence, meaning, or purpose, and that we're the only conscious beings in this lifeless universe, which seems an incredible conclusion to draw. With the arrival of Descartes and scientific materialism, the body, like the universe, came to be regarded as a mechanism, something that could be manipulated by the discoveries of science and medicine. Richard Tarnas, professor of philosophy at the California Institute for Integral Studies, asks the looming question of our time. What is the ultimate impact of cosmological disenchantment on a civilization? What does it do to the human self year after year, century after century, to experience existence as a conscious, purposeful being in an unconscious, purposeless universe? What is the price of a collective belief in absolute cosmic indifference? And what are the consequences of this unprecedented cosmological context for the human experiment, indeed for the entire planet? I think that's one of the most crucial questions that can be asked. So I've said here that from a Jungian perspective, transhumanism is a huge inflation of the ego that has identified itself with God and claimed his power to itself. Believing that it can overcome death through technology is part of this inflation. Nemesis would come, as Professor Walach has pointed out, with the increase of the population, which would need to be controlled and culled. Transhumanists do not seem to have any awareness that death is not the end of our life, that we have an immortal soul or immortal consciousness that previous cultures have known and described, and I would put the Gnostics there again, and the Essenes. We're just so incredibly ignorant of these traditions that could heal us, wake us up, and bring us to our true humanity. As Chris Bache said in his LSD and the Mind of the Universe, he said we're moving towards the future human in our own evolutionary path. We don't need help from the transhumanists. I'll just end with this, that three of the greatest traditions, spiritual traditions of the world, have spoken about our innate divinity. Hinduism, about the Atman, or divine core of our being. Buddhism, about our underlying Buddha nature. And Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas about the kingdom of heaven that is within us and all around us, although we cannot see it. All three have said that our undeveloped consciousness prevents us from knowing and experiencing the truth of who we are. Our indwelling divinity is expressed and enabled to grow through the exercise of love, compassion, and service of life. And you can see that in the lives of people who've been recognized as great saints, including Mother Teresa, for example. Killing others contravenes the law of life. Developing weapons of mass destruction also contravenes the law of life because they envisage and condone the destruction of life. They imagine what they're going to do to the bodies of other people and how millions will be killed with one bomb. This is insanity, and it hasn't been recognized as such. So I think that's all I need to say, really. I probably say more than I need. I had a few extra notes somewhere around.
And thank you very much.
I think that's enough then.
For bringing that Jungian perspective. And I love the idea of giving a sort of session to transhumanism as a Jungian analyst. This is a nice thought experiment. And here's Anne's new book, which I'll be reviewing in the next issue, Divine Wisdom and the Holy Spirit, the Forgotten Feminine Face of God. And this voice of the feminine and the voice of the sacred is incredibly important. So thank you for expressing that. And on that note, we'll go over to Greg.
Anne, I love it when you talk that way. Thank you for making my job easier today. And I just want to say thank you to Harold and Ian as well, and David for putting this all together. I had notes, and after listening to each of you, those notes would be redundant. So what I'm just going to say that I am very passionate about this topic. I have been since I became aware of the transhuman movement during the Cold War in the 1980s. A lot of people believe this is something new. I was working with artificial intelligence and working as a computer systems designer during the Cold War years. And we saw the beginnings, the foundation of everything we're talking about right now. And it was easy to see where that was headed. So I'm going to come at this from two different parallel perspectives. One, this isn't a conversation about what's going to happen 5 years or 10 years from now. We're in it. We're in it right now. The transhuman movement is deeply entrenched into our society right now. And there's a concerted effort to replace our humanness with machines, with AI, computer chips in the brain, chemicals in the blood, RFID chips under the skin, nanosensors in the respiratory and the circulatory systems, that, it goes on and on. That movement is afoot right now. And the best minds of our time now are telling us that unless we change the trajectory of that movement, that very probably we are the last generation of what will be called pure humans that this world will ever know. Because within this single generation, by the year 2030 to 2032, for example, when you speak to someone in the grocery store, in the market, the workplace, you will be speaking to some degree of a hybrid between biological human and machine, some obviously to a lesser degree, some to a greater degree. So we are in this movement right now, and the effort is being masked by really slick and sexy marketing that is avoiding the language that we're using today. The word transhuman is rarely used, and we are being given benefits dangled like little shiny carrots in front of us without being told the downside of what it means to give our humanness away to machines and technology. So that is one way that I'm going to talk about this. The other one is the science. The best science of the modern world is showing us that in many respects, our own natural biology not only meets, but we exceed the capabilities of the very technology we're being asked to put into our bodies. And it's a very, very different way of thinking. And I'm going to be the first to acknowledge that. When I was working behind the scenes in the Cold War, it was a very civilized kind of war in some respects. Governments were at war, but scientists were still cooperating. Scientists were still exchanging information or research. And the Russians were some of the first that began to look at the human body, not as soft, gooey, sticky, mushy biological stuff, but they began to look at the human body from the perspective of IT, information technology. Man, that was a very, very different way. The first time a Soviet researcher sent a schematic drawing of a human cell as a gated circuit. As an engineer, my background, I'm a computer scientist, I'm a degree geologist, geophysicist, with a strong background, math, physics, computer science. And I was looking at a schematic diagram of 50 trillion cells in my body, and it didn't stop there. So the science is telling us that we are literally a soft technology. We're not the primitive hard technology of a silicon chip. We're more than that. We are neurons and cell membranes and ion potentials moving across cell walls. And the beauty of who we are, our humanness, is that we're the only form of life that we know of that can self-regulate our own biology at will, on demand, when we choose, through what we call epigenetics. Primary epigenetic triggers, or 7 primary epigenetic triggers: thought, feeling, emotion, belief, breath, focus, movement, and nutrition. Of course, there are others that are variations of that. But the idea is that through choices that we make consciously, we can change the way that our body performs. And the technology that we're building outside of our body literally mimics what we already do in our cells. We're photon emitters, photon receivers. Every cell's got about 0.07 volts of electrical potential. Do the math, 50 trillion times 0.07 is about 3.5 trillion volts of electrical potential. Not realized, but it's potential. And when we do realize that, what's it mean we apply that to our healing, or we apply that to our intuition? We apply that to our longevity enzymes that live in every cell of the body. And that goes on and on. What's really interesting to me, I'm going to share a couple of experiments. The journal, well, the idea of us being information technology is not common knowledge, because the discoveries are often relegated to obscure technical journals, which I love to read at bedtime. I have a stack on my bedstand for light bedtime reading, and I know a lot of people don't. For example, the Journal of Soft Computing is now identifying human DNA as a 3-dimensional fractal antenna. That's a very different way to think about DNA. Fractal means that an antenna picks up signals and transmits signals. Fractal means we pick up and receive those signals across a broad spectrum of information. And the question is, what are we tuning into, and what are we receiving? The Journal of Complementary and Alternative Medicine stated very clearly, and I'm going to do this just from memory, that there's compelling evidence that the human heart, the neural network in the human heart, is linked to a field of information that is not bound by the laws of physics. That there's a part of us, a natural part of us, that is linked to information, to energy, in a way that's not bound by the laws of space and time, at least as we know those laws today. And those kinds of things they give us the reason to begin thinking about ourselves very differently. So let me share an experiment that scientists are struggling with interpreting the outcome right now. This was done by the Salk Institute in the year 2022. And what they did was they took some human neurons separate from a body. They put them into a petri dish, and they connected those neurons to a chip, a computer chip, so they could load the neurons into a computer that was loaded with the video game that came out in November of 1972. I remember when it came out. The game is called Pong, P-O-N-G. And some of our younger viewers may not remember this game or have never seen it. A very primitive video game. It looks like table tennis or badminton. The point is that when they loaded these neurons, the neurons began playing the game of Pong. And the longer they played, the more they learned and the better they got. And so now the scientists are asking, where are the instructions to play the game of Pong? Are they somehow loaded into these neurons? And what the studies are showing is that the neurons are an antenna, a biological antenna that are tuned to a field of information. And that information apparently is where Pong lives in our field. Many words we can give to that field of information. But this supports what Anne was saying almost universally. Our ancestors, our ancient indigenous traditions, they all say to us, there's a part of us that's not bound in the physical body, that we are the product of many iterations of genetic attempts to hold an energetic essence in a physical body, whether we call that the soul, whatever it is that we want to call that. There's a part of us that's not in the body. The transhuman movement is ignorant of this. They are operating out of fear, the fear of death, and the ignorance that believes that this is all there is. So those scientists, they're dissecting the neurons, looking for the Pong instructions, trying to figure out where they are. And this is just one experiment, one example. So our young people today, the next generation, are very vulnerable to what we're talking about here. They're being indoctrinated as we were. This began right in the mid-20th century, right after the Second World War. We began indoctrinating young people to believe that we are a flawed form of life, and that because we're flawed, we need something outside of us to be the best version of ourselves and to compete in the world. That something is technology. Now we're seeing that en masse. We're seeing young people worship AI, worship the computer chip. But here's what they're not being told. They're not being told of the downside of what happens when we give our humanness away. So let me just give one more example here. There was a time we were all taught that we are born into this world with a finite number of brain cells. And as you go through life, choices of lifestyle can destroy those brain cells. We all heard that, when we were in college, every beer you drink, you're going to lose brain cells. Now we know that this isn't true. We know that the hippocampus is producing new cells until the last breath we take on this planet. But there is a catch, and the catch is this. Unless our new cells coming from the hippocampus, unless they're engaged in a meaningful way within about 7 to 10 days, the body believes that those cells are not needed because they're not being used. This is the key, because they're not being used. And those cells will atrophy and die. That principle applies to the entire human body. It applies to the immune system. It applies to the reproductive system. When we begin replacing our natural biology with technology, our body believes that those natural abilities are no longer necessary because they're being replicated artificially. And because we adapt, this is what we do. Our bodies morph and adapt to functioning without the abilities that we used to have. And this is already happening. It's already being documented. Young people using virtual AI goggles, 3 hours a day, weeks on end. They're showing cognitive decline. The parts of their brain, the visual cortex is getting bigger because they're viewing, but their ability to imagine, to create, to innovate, their social innovation skills, their actual brain size is decreasing. And this is just one example. When we give our humanness away to technology, it's not like you can turn a little dial and say, oh, we don't like that. Let's go back to the way we used to be. We are on the precipice of losing our humanness, giving away our species. And once it's gone, we'll never get it back. This is how you lose a species. And there are reasons why. In another conversation, we could talk about the intent and how vulnerable we become when we give our humanness away. It's all part of the equation. But for what we're talking about right now, I think it's important that there is an awareness in our communities. And I also want to clarify, because some people, when they hear these conversations, they say, well, does that mean I shouldn't get a titanium hip, or an artificial heart? And the answer is no. This is not about one-off applications that extend our lives when we need to do that. This is about en masse, the proposals, the policies already being written. The United Nations is on board with some of these policies of implementing policies through medical interventions, through diet, and additives in foods and things like that. They are on board with this to change the fundamental nature of our humanness. Now, Anne used a word that is the core of my new book, and that word is divinity. In our ancient texts, people tend to link divinity with religion. The contemporary definition does not do that. The contemporary definition of divinity is our ability to transcend perceived limitations, to become more than the limits that may not even be real, perceived limitations. That is our humanness. That's us being the best version of ourselves. So, examples of divinity, expressions of divinity are imagination, creativity, innovation, empathy, sympathy, compassion, love, the ability to heal, forgiveness. These are all fundamental expressions of our divinity that we stand to lose if we surrender our humanness to the technology that's being dangled in front of us in exchange for efficiency and speed. So I'm going to stop there with one question. And the question I think we're all asking is very simple. Do we love ourselves enough? As individuals, do we love ourselves enough as the human species to accept the deep truth of what it means to be human and the responsibility that comes with the power of our fully realized humanness? And we're not going to have to wait long to see how we answer this question, because it's going to be answered one way or another in a single generation. So I'm going to stop there, David, and we can open it up maybe to some other questions.
Greg, fantastic. What an extraordinary set of contributions from our panel following on what Harald had to share with us. Let's highlight everyone, Bruce, all the panelists. I just want to ask Harald whether he has any observations he'd like to make, brief observations he'd like to make in response to the other panelists. And then we'll open up.
No, not really. I'm very grateful to everybody. I think Ian has put in the flavor and the passion, which I didn't put into it because that's not my job. And Greg has mentioned the really dire straits we are in, and that it has been in long preparation. And I think Anne's assessment of this being pure evil, I can support. As a person, I would support it. As a scientist, I think it's difficult to use that word, but I think she's correct. But she's a therapist, she can do that. I'm a scientist, I'm a little bit more careful.
Okay, thank you very much, Harald. So we'll go on to some questions, and if your question is for a particular person in the panel, then do say that. Otherwise, we'll invite anybody to respond to whatever comes up. It's Sue, is the first one.
Okay, am I unmuted here?
You are.
I just want to say, first of all, a huge thank you to all the speakers. I think this is probably one of the most important topics that we're faced with, one of the most important threats. So there is a question coming, but first I just wanted to highlight this book, Alt-Reich, because he goes into a discussion, and this fits into what Greg was saying, that actually after the Second World War, many of the Nazis were taken up, as we know, into the United States, but not only there, also in this country. And they actually brought with them their philosophy, which went kind of underground. And I think it's really important to understand the origins, that actually, in a way, this never went away. Eugenics is an absolute part of this desire for control, as Anne rightly points out. It's an ego inflation, it's a narcissistic attitude, and it wants to control people, and it lacks empathy and it lacks love, and it comes from a place where actually these things happened during the Second World War, in the concentration camps and so on. So I think we should be in no doubt that it's not just something that's kind of come up with technology. It was around, and technology is facilitating these attitudes to actually happen. And I guess the question is the most obvious one. What are we going to do about it? What can we do? How can we somehow, help young people not to be caught up in it? How can we challenge politically? Any thoughts on that would be welcome. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, open it up. Whoever would like to speak, Greg.
Sue, I think you've just hit the nail on the head. We do live events all over the world, and the young people that come to our events, no one is telling our young people how rare and precious their lives are, how delicate yet powerful their bodies are, and what it means to be human, their capabilities. They're being told just the opposite, and for that reason, they don't give a second thought to what they're putting into their bodies, what they do to their bodies, and they're looking and welcoming the technology to save them. So I think it's our responsibility to inform, and that's what we're doing right here, to let people know that this movement exists. But also the flip side, it's scary if you can't do anything about it. When we begin to understand the true extent of our human capacities and our human potentials, and how easy it is to unlock those potentials, the more we understand that, I think the less urgency people in general will feel to bring technology into their bodies, because they'll discover they are the technology. We are the technology.
Can I just add something to that? I think I would absolutely underline that. And I think information is key, because people do not really see what is going on. And I think language and putting it out and making it clear and opening up a discourse, that is a very important element. On a very generic level, I think what we need is spiritual practice. If people are anchored within their own selves, they are not as prone to these ideas and to these movements. So I think promoting that would also be a very helpful thing.
Yes, I think that's very important. Okay, I think we can pass on. Thank you, Sue. We'll pass on to Andrew.
Thank you very much. I would like to direct this mostly to Ian, but Greg, like you, I did my career 42 years in the computer industry, where I was a chief technology officer of a company. This question really has to do with the work of Rudolf Steiner. And I noticed somebody in the chat brought him up through another author named Ari Torreson. You mentioned, Ian, power without wisdom, and I want to add to that, power without love. And I think that's sort of where Anne was trying to take us as well, that the situation in which we are in today, I think, is, if I were to look at what Christianity was supposed to be, sorry, it didn't get there. We destroyed it back in 325. And then in 869 as well, we further destroyed the idea of the human being as body, soul, and spirit. But in John 21, there's this wonderful interplay between Peter and Christ, and at the end of this discussion, Peter expects, when Christ says, "Follow me," that the lead beloved disciple, John, should be doing this work. He points to him and says, "What about him?" And Christ says, "What is it that I have him wait until I come again? You have your mission, follow me." And for me, that meant something called agape love. That is a form of love I think we have not even much of a notion as to what it is. We try to translate it to spiritual love or something, but I think we don't know it. And I think this whole movement, not just transhumanism, but AI, is leading to 90% of the possible workforce will be without work in the near future. You mentioned the year 2030, Greg, and I think that is coming, where 90% of people will not have jobs. How do we, out of a kind of new agape love, out of a brotherhood? So that's one of the questions which I was hoping Ian could try to answer, but Greg, it looks like you might want to answer that
Okay.
too.
Yeah.
How do we have a society where the economic, which I live in America, isn't the dominant? How do we have, because I think we'll kill it, whether it's transhumanism, kill life, kill humanity, whether it's transhumanism or the economics. There's all
Okay.
sorts of
But,
things.
well,
Yeah.
thanks very much, Andrew. So Ian, and then Greg.
Yeah,
and then-
well, I mean, this is where I haven't wanted to bring this up, but I think the understanding of the hemisphere differences in humans is enormously important, because it is possible for these two hemispheres to produce, and they do produce very usefully different experiential versions of the world, but with quite different purposes and quite different values. And I can't possibly unfold all this now, but I've done it so many times on the internet and in my books that I'm sure people will not need me to do so. But the point there is, as you say, that the left hemisphere has one value, which is power, and it is about power and control. And that discourse, as Anne was pointing out, has become more and more important since about the late 17th century, the so-called scientific revolution, made more so by the Enlightenment and more so still by modernism and postmodernism, with a wonderful period known as Romanticism, which tried to look the other way. But the right hemisphere does understand love. It is our right frontal cortex that enables us to understand what another person is suffering, to sympathize with them, to be compassionate to them, and to love them. And everything that I've said can be most economically expressed by looking at the differences between these two hemispheric visions of the world. One is that of the left hemisphere is driven solely by power and control. It doesn't understand implicit meaning. It doesn't understand compassion. It has a Machiavellian way of viewing other people and life in general. And its thinking is abstract, disembodied. In fact, the left hemisphere, when people, this is all based on a whole range of kinds of study, but on its own, the left hemisphere resents things that it itself has not made. And it prefers things that it can make and give to itself, to anything that has come from nature. Now, it seems to me that what we need in this world is not more power and control, more self-control, no doubt, but more compassion, more humility, and more awe. Now, again, I can't unfold all that, but those three things are very heavily right hemisphere dependent. The left hemisphere doesn't understand them. It is naturally hubristic to an extent that if you haven't read my work, I can't really bring it to you now, but it is extraordinarily hubristic. It's in denial of the truth when it doesn't fit its own preferred way of looking at things. It is incapable of compassion in the sense that it is needed, and awe is missing. It sort of gets rather irritated by expressions of wonder or awe, because it says soon we'll all know all the answers. But anybody who thinks that has got a very, very limited mentality. It's rather like the famous Dunning-Kruger effect, that the less you know, the more you think you know. And that is the world of the left hemisphere. It's the world in which we now live. So when you say, what do we do about this? I think there are various things, but they don't consist in one kind of thing only. I would say that getting together a group of leading scientists in the same way that Einstein and others got together to to talk about the dangers of the atomic bomb, I think we are in that situation where we need a very strong lead from public scientists on this. We need government to revise very heavily any kind of sense that it is subsidizing this process. We should have the knowledge that Harold is putting forward more widely disseminated, and that is one of the whole purposes of the Galileo Commission. But at the end of the day, unless we change ourselves, unless we change our hearts, unless we change the way we look at the world, and you know, it's all of no use. I feel that very strongly. We can make technical changes, but unless we stop following this vision, which is a very, very, very simple mechanistic model of what a human being should be, that leaves out everything that makes life worth living for it. Unless we attack that, get rid of it, and promote the vision of us as essentially spiritual beings, we will be lost, and also we deserve to be lost.
Goodness. Wow. Thank you, Ian. Greg, follow that.
Well, thank you, Ian. And everything that Ian has just mentioned, all of the virtues and the qualities of our humanness that we cherish are only possible because of our biology. There's a direct link between humanness, DNA, and our divinity, our biology. And that's why I wanted to share those experiments. If our DNA is a fractal antenna, if our neurons are antenna, and those antenna that tune us to the parts of ourselves that we cherish, to our human interpretations of love and forgiveness and compassion and memories, is a compelling body of evidence suggests that memories don't live in our brains, and memories don't live in our bodies. So if we replace our natural biology with synthetics, we lose access to all of the things that Ian is describing, and we lose access to what arguably is the essence of our humanness. I'm a scientist. I don't care anymore, really, what anybody thinks about what I'm saying, because we've lost so much credibility in these conversations. This is one of those places where we need to cross the traditional boundaries that have separated and compartmentalized the sciences so that we have a systems view of our world and our relationship to the world. This is where the concept of evil, there's a lot of baggage that comes with that word, and I acknowledge that. But the goal of evil, according to those Gnostic texts, is to deny us our divinity, to deny us our humanness. So now we have a benchmark. Anything that we're asked to accept into our bodies or into our lives that prevents us from healing our own bodies, from loving, from forgiving, from empathy for our brothers and sisters, imagination, creativity, anything that's doing that for us, we can say, is that good for us? Is that an expression of evil? And that gives us a place to begin to know where we can have these conversations. So I'll stop there, David, but I think this is, yeah, it's important to cross those traditional boundaries and not get locked into one box of genetics or, biology, because we'll never see the answers if we do that.
Yeah, and I do like, Ian, your suggestion of a sort of panel, or it's a forum in which these issues can be properly discussed. I'm just taking a time check here. Officially, we've got about 10 minutes to go, but are you all okay for an extra time of 15 minutes? I'm panelists. I just need if we can go on to a quarter past. Is that okay? Or have you got another meeting?
Fine.
Yeah,
Yes.
good.
I'm okay, but we might still try to keep everything a little bit
absolutely. Yeah. No. So what I'm going to
Yes.
say, we're going to take the 5 people who have their hands up already, and then I'm afraid anybody who thinks they can put their hand up after Ray Edgar, sorry, it's too late. So let's go to Darren, and as you say, let's keep things moving.
Potentially, this conversation could go on for
Indeed.
days and days and days. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and it should.
It should.
But not on this occasion.
No.
Thank you, Harold, and thank you, everybody on the panel. It's been absolutely fascinating. And what was a very simple question for me is now being tainted by all of your input that's just colored all of my thoughts now. I'm interested in the human animal, the evolutional biology of this human animal. So when we're talking transhuman, we're talking about this augmentation of this current iteration. You know, like Greg said, we're a self-regulating soft technology, and everything appears to be in transhumanism, this augmentation of our current iteration, which in itself has evolved over however long since we've moved out of the primordial soup. You know, and I think about Antonio Damasio in his book Feeling and Knowing, that explains how we're, or talks about how we're feeling animals that think, not thinking animals that feel. So we are this current iteration that is made of its parts. And biology aside, if we think of ourselves as the biopsychosocial or biopsychosocial spiritual model, you know, you factor all of this into this current iteration. And so at a really realistic level, I want to know people's thoughts on what is the bringing together of these two technologies, this ancient technology that we are the latest iteration of, alongside this current augmented technology. And we can already see, you know, we've seen that this is coming in through stealth already anyway, with, you know, the kids on, or us on phones, or the kids on VR and things like this. And we can see the detrimental effect that all of this is having already. So I'd like to know from maybe Ian and Greg's, you know, kind of more psychological and biological kind of viewpoints. What is the realistic impact of trying to update the latest iteration of this ancient technology that is the human?
Thank you. Who'd like to?
I'd just like to say that I'm uncomfortable that Anne hasn't been given a chance to contribute. I thought what she had to say was profound and important, and I'm worried that the two blokes here are doing that blokish thing and doing too much talking, and I'd like to hear more from Anne, but the questions may not be one Anne wants to
I don't
answer.
think I can answer that question. I'm afraid I'll gladly hand it over to you or to Greg.
I'm not sure I fully understood it, frankly. So, I mean, I don't like it when people talk about this technology, meaning our biology. Biology is not best thought of as a technology at all, or as information, in fact. These are very reduced ways of thinking about what material existence is. And an important theme that has been brought up has been the relationship between our mental lives and our physical lives. And I think it's intimate. I think that matter is not just mere lumpen matter that amazingly has no meaning, no order, chaotically bumps into itself a million times, and then suddenly up comes Bach St. Matthew Passion. Where did that come out of all that meaningless dust colliding for billions of years? I have the clue. So I think matter is already something that has spirit in it. And in fact, I believe that matter and consciousness are phases of the same underlying entity. And by phases, I don't mean temporal phases, I mean phases as in water. That can be ice, it can be the water that's invisible, or it can be water that flows in a river. But I think matter and consciousness don't look like one another, but in fact, matter is something that we experience in our consciousness, which can't be denied. The consciousness can't be denied, but it is there and it is part of reality. So the two need to go together. But I don't want to take up any more time because, as I say, I didn't really understand the question.
Okay, Darren, I think we'll have to leave it there. Leave it there if you don't mind, because we've still got 4 people in the queue. So James, I think you're next.
Well, I'll make this quick and I'll be very direct. Thank you all very much for doing this. This made my year. I'm one of the original MK Ultra whistleblowers. I was on the Freedom of Thought Foundation in 1990. I knew this whole thing was going to come pass a long time ago. I'm the chief advisor for the BCI Committee for the U.S. and the International Committee for Information Technology Standards. And I have literally been going crazy in the last month dealing with people in the United States regarding this issue. It is the #1 issue. And frankly, I wish Anne, that speech you just gave, I wish you gave it to Congress, Department of Defense, DARPA, CIA, NSA, all those guys, because this conversation is exactly what needs to be told all over the place in multiple countries and multiple languages. It is way past what people know about. I was asked if I would be part of this committee specifically and do things that sign security agreements. I decided not to because of what was happening. So my question, because I know there's other people here and I'm supposed to be on a BCI committee meeting in 7 minutes. My question is, are you guys going to do this again? Is it possible to stay in touch with all of you? And I need to those two things, and also to let you know that there's lawsuits being filed. Their first neurocognitive filings are happening in the United States and local government and with the UCC. And there's going to be lawsuits filed that I know against Palantir and a couple other companies because of this tech that they're doing. Because the thing is, what's happening here is exactly what should be happening all over the place. So I'm down for all of this on a continuous basis. So that's what I just wanted to ask is, what are you guys going to do next and how can I help? That's it.
Thanks very much, James. We'll certainly be in touch. And the reason we commissioned this report and we're having this event is exactly, to raise the issues and make people aware of the very deep and far-reaching implications of where we are, and also the urgency of the situation, which I think
yes.
Highlights both of this. Anne, you'd like to say
I just
something?
wanted to say to James that I know quite a lot what's been going on in America because I'm 3/4 American. I follow it. There is somebody called Dr. David Martin, who is a dogmas man and who knows all about this and all about Palantir. So I think that you have people in America, if you all keep in touch with them, with him in particular, he would be a wonderful force because he has that terrific energy and he's well informed, better informed than anybody else I've ever heard, really. So that's just a comment.
Yes, thanks, Harold.
I just want to say thank you, James, for coming out with that, and I'm happy to speak in the Lions Den if anybody cares for it. So we will be doing that all over the place.
And
Right,
Greg, find me. Greg, find me.
And just to say that one of the plans following this up is for Harold to do a podcast series, and everybody on this panel will obviously be invited to participate. But this is still in the planning as phase at the moment. But we really want to get the word out and just make people aware so that they can, come to their own view. Richard.
All right. I sort of grew up as a rational scientist and was a rational scientist for many, many years, 38. But when I was a child, I had a connection with God. So I'm a bit different from a lot of people because I know God exists. I've communicated directly with him. So that's just the background and gives you the reason for why my sort of view is slightly different. So what I realize is that I looked at a lot of occult documents. I looked into the occults and read all the sort of documents that were in lots of secret societies and all this sort of thing. And I read the book by Arthur C. Clarke called Childhood's End. And what you find is Satanism, what transhumanism is actually the doctrine of Satanism turned into a different way. And Satanism has been promoted through our culture via science fiction. People like Arthur C. Clarke, who were in science fiction authors, and many other people. And so they promoted these concepts and put them into the collective psyche via Hollywood and things like that. So it's been pushed into our brains. This is why such a high proportion of people believe in it, because they've already been primed with the concepts. So yeah, childhood ends, and the 2001 Space Odyssey was one of the big turning points, because that was when the idea of the sort of star child came up. And the star child is this transhuman entity, right?
And what's the question?
Yeah,
Well,
do you have a question? Because I think
yes, sorry. Right, so the question
are interesting.
Okay, so the question is, what
and
is
the
your
science-
view on the effect of science fiction and occultism on this topic?
I would very much agree with you that it is something that has inspired popular culture, and that a lot of that is coming out of a perverted kind of religion. And the only way how you can oppose that is by offering a proper kind of religion or a good spirituality.
Yes. Anyone else want to say
Yeah,
anything?
there's the emerging philosophy that regarding reality, that consciousness informs itself through its creations, which suggests that the books and the music and the art is us asking ourselves to remember something, and that applies to some Hollywood movies. So yes, to what you're saying in terms of the normalization of evil, that definitely is happening. But the consciousness is fighting back with that with movies like The Matrix, for example. The Matrix was about a world that we can't see that influences a world that we can see, and we exist in both of those worlds. That was the fundamental theme. It was one of the highest grossing box office hits, and it was a low budget movie, but it spoke to us. Avatar, it does the same thing, reminding us of our relationship to nature. And the movies with young people like The Avengers and Wonder Woman, all speaking to dormant or latent abilities within us. Of course, they Hollywoodize it, but the themes is us. What are we asking ourselves to remember about ourselves? And I think that's a very important question that we all can participate in when we see what we're being fed through these media.
Thanks very much. Of course, the Harry Potter is another huge theme, isn't it? The way that
I mean, could I just make one point? I don't think that I don't think it's completely crazy to think that there are consciousnesses that are not our consciousnesses, but are disembodied. Every tradition in the world that I know of has such creatures that can be well disposed or ill disposed towards us, and can inhabit structures that allow them to ingress in such a way that they can help manipulate the world so as to destroy what, from a Christian point of view, was the great prize of God's creation. So I think there are forces that wish the downfall of humanity, and I think they are having a field day right now. And I agree that what we need is a proper rootedness in a sound religion, not a lot of playing with black magic and other things which we don't understand and may indeed be harmful.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. Paul.
Thank you. Thank you for the light that you all bring. I'm grateful to this, and I look forward for more of it to come. The question I had is in the larger context, and this is to the full panel, but I know Anne might have something to say about this. What might the role of transmigration of souls play in this conversation in the sense of Pythagoras and Periclides of Syros? How does this, the transmigration, and especially it seems like this is really a deeper conversation on psyche and soul in humanity. And I think that touches the divinity that Greg's talking about. So that's kind of and Ian, I mean, you all are my heroines and heroics. So thank you more for all of this. It's very heartfelt. Thank you. Transmigration of soul.
Well, I think that's a very important point that you've brought up. And I think that a great deal was known by Pythagoras and indeed by Parmenides and the great pre-Socratics that we've completely forgotten, but they went into caves to incubate, to get the answers that they were asking, the questions that they were answering, and then they brought back the answers to their communities and gave them out that way. But reincarnation has been so much a teaching in the Hindu tradition, and also in Taoism to some extent. So I don't know why that isn't better known. And to me, I know other lives that I've had, and it seems perfectly normal that I'm doing this life now, finishing off a job that I may not have, that I've started in another one. And it all makes perfect sense. And I can then understand my role now, because I can look back on perhaps what I did or didn't do in the past. So it gives us a much wider perspective to know that you've had many lives.
Yes, thank you, Anne. And I think what the other sort of related point is cultural, because we know that cultures have risen and disappeared, and there's a a resonance certainly with the myth of Atlantis and the destruction of Atlantis. I don't know whether Greg liked to comment on that, because we're at this kind of precipice point, in my view, at the moment, and I also accept that that things are cyclical, and so something has to break down for something else to emerge.
Yeah, well, I think, in the interest of time, I'll just be brief. This is no ordinary time in history, and that's why we're having this conversation. We're living a rare convergence of cycles, from cosmological to geological to tectonic to spiritual cycles that are all converging right now. And we probably couldn't have had this conversation 50 years ago, because those cycles were not playing the same role. And that is precisely why it's so important that we make the choice now. And to what Ian was saying, and Anne as well, I think we can try to regulate technology, but that technology is only being applied based upon the way we have been led to think of ourselves. So as we develop a rock solid understanding of who we are, what our capacities are, what our capabilities are, and that covers a lot of ground, I think the technology becomes less of a threat, because we don't feel the need to bring it into our bodies. We can use it in our lives to serve us, but not become enslaved by the technology.
So I think if we can light a candle and perhaps turn off the electrical switch, all this stuff is being run on electromagnetics. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Harold, you wanted to make an
Yeah,
observation.
I just wanted to say, I'm a big fan of Leibniz. He's one of my philosophical heroes. And Leibniz used to say, souls don't migrate. They go to sleep and they wake up. So what we may be facing may be a group of souls that need to be educated.
Well, we certainly need to wake up, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Ray, you're the final question.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody. It's been a fascinating couple of hours. I'm not going to talk about transmigration of souls, but what's hit me quite hard is the population in the room, the way we've talked about younger generations and what they're planning on doing themselves and not. And Andrew asked earlier, what can we do? Now, Ian talked about more compassion, more humanity, the way we look at the world. And I think Greg talked about things are systemic. I don't think there's any surprise. And genuinely, I'm not sure how many people in this room understand the world these younger generations are living in. I mean, for 15 years now, no real rise in income. Nobody who's a young person now can seriously consider buying a house or have the sort of future that we considered as a given. Capitalism is falling apart around them. They've had to grow up with social media. I laugh when I see people using 2 thumbs on the bus, because I say, they think differently than me, because I can't even imagine doing that. Yet it's very simple to them. And I make a joke of that, but quite honestly, there's almost like a Maslow's hierarchy thing going on here, because we're talking about people who haven't had the space, the opportunity, and are so stressed out that they'll literally listen to anything. And so what I'm asking the people in this room is, What can we do to get those people into this conversation and actually break down that divide so that people who are in their late 50s and 60s begin to understand what these people are trying to live with? And when I see these people, I have 2 children in their 20s, and that's exactly what I am experiencing with them.
Thank you so much, Ray. I think part of what we could do actually is we could actually have an intergenerational dialogue on these matters. We've got, just hang on a second, Ian. Bruce, our host, is part of the new Paradigm Navigators, and they've got a conference coming up not this weekend, but next weekend. And so I think just getting these different views and perspectives will be very valuable. Ian.
Well, I just feel that I want to reassure Ray that certainly for me, he's completely misunderstood anything I said. I am not here to blame young people for the difficult situation they're in. I thought I described the very difficult world picture that we had bequeathed to them. And I think 2 other important things, that wherever I go, what heartens me is the number of people who come up after I talk who are young and say, what you're saying seems to speak to me very powerfully. What can we do? And I think there is no lack of hope there. I think the lack of hope is for the people who are driving this stuff are not young people. They're people in their 50s and 60s or possibly younger, but with a lot of money. And this is just not what I am certainly saying at all. And the final thing I'd like to say is we don't understand nowadays the relationship between opposites. The worse it gets, in a sense, the better it gets. The more we are forced to face a crisis. We've been far too comfortable for far too long, so we haven't really faced anything. We've drifted in sort of a luxurious kind of disengagement from these questions. But now, as things get really steeply bad, I mean, then I think that we will see the changes that need to be called forth, because people are very resilient, humanity is unpredictable, and I think we have great resources.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian.
Ian, I don't think you're blaming anybody, and I certainly don't feel that at all. It was just a question of, I think in general, people who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s are out of touch. They don't really realize the world that the younger people who we refer to are actually living in. And how could they? How could they?
Well, Ray, to exemplify that, I was just in a live event with young people recently, and I had a 14-year-old boy who came with his mom. And he said, Mr. Braden, and I said, please call me Greg. And he said, Greg, everything I'm hearing in this room makes perfect sense in this room. He said, when I go to school, none of my friends think this way. And that's it right there. It's about sharing the information, I think, in a meaningful way. And there's a powerful difference between fighting against what we don't want and moving toward what we know is possible. And I think this is an opportunity to move toward the development of our humanness, to really embrace these potentials that are being shown. Buckminster Fuller said it beautifully. You know, you're not going to change the world by fighting against what you don't like. Find a new way that's better, and the old way becomes obsolete. There's a handful of people, and they are older. They're in their 60s to 80s, whose ideas are driving the technology in the applications we're talking about, in things like what we call the fourth industrial revolution. And they are unelected officials. We didn't ask them to determine what world we live in. We all have the opportunity for non-compliance, and non-compliance simply means the sanctity of the human body, and where we choose to draw our personal lines. And that's once the information is clear, the choices become obvious, and it's about simply informing of who we are and what our potentials are.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ray. Let's have some concluding observations from anyone who'd like to make.
Well,
could I just say one thing? One thing there, sorry to interrupt, but one of the most important things to avoid is digital IDs, which are being promoted now, because that will be the open door to enslaving all of us. So we can spread that among the young. Do not sign up for these digital IDs. That's one comment that I'd like to make.
And any other reflection you'd like to add
Yeah,
overall?
I would like to add a reflection, which I think we haven't mentioned previously. I think what is really needed is a good continuous education from preschool to school to university, where these ideas are critically reflected on, and where maybe also a kind of competency in accessing our inner resources is part of the curriculum.
Yes, very good point. Thank you. Anyone else like to make any final observations before we sign off?
Well, I think prompted by a comment that I just saw in the chat, saying yes, it's very important we have to be moving forward in capital letters. I don't think anybody has said we shouldn't be moving forward, and I just want to reflect on the possible problem of being positive all the time. There was a terrific piece in today's Times by James Marriott. I don't know if people have read it, but if you haven't, do read it, on the power of pessimism, and that actually thinking, I mean, keeping hope, I always call myself a hopeful pessimist, but keeping hope is very, very important. But seeing that things are going badly wrong is not a mistake, and it's more likely to give rise to action than the complacent feeling that all is fine if we just move forward in a certain way. So I just think that all needs a bit of nuance. There's been nothing negative about saying certain things are wrong and we should resist them. It is the other side of certain things are good and we should go for them. And I think today we've discussed both of those a lot.
Yes, and Mara van der Lucht has written a book called Hopeful Pessimism. She's
Has she?
Yeah, I reviewed it.
Oh, right.
She's a lecturer at St Andrews University in the philosophy department. So not so okay.
I don't exactly have.
I will send you. I'll send you the details. I'm sorry, since we can't take any further questions or comments.
No.
Just anyone else like to say anything? Any final word?
I just want to thank you, David, for pulling this panel together. I want to thank all the panelists. I have followed you from afar, and it's an honor to be here with you near. And thank everyone for sharing a part of your day with us today. I think really this all comes down. We've got so many nuances, but it all comes down to us. Do we love ourselves enough to preserve our humanness? I believe we are worth preserving. I believe our humanness is worth preserving. And this is the generation where we have to make that choice.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on, Greg. Thank you all so much for your inspiration. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Do make sure that you're getting our news, signing up for the Galileo Commission as a friend or a professional affiliate, or to get the network digest. Tomorrow night, I'm going to be talking about transcendence, as it happens, with Susan Plunkett, who's a Jungian analyst, 3 forms of transcendence. And then on Thursday, we're going to be talking about the Zeno text from Christian Bock, and that's on the book briefing. So do keep in touch with us. Thank you so much for coming along. Thank you, Bruce, for your technical support. And we'll definitely want to pursue these questions with a younger panel. I think, you know, we all need to hear what young people have to say. I think maybe an intergenerational dialogue is the way to go. So thanks so much, and have a good